I just want to visit my wife.
I don't care. Get out of here!
Officer Tased, a veteran, outside his wife's funeral. 7 minutes later, Marines took over the street. When Officer Bradley tased retired Marine Sergeant Daniel "Tank" Rodriguez outside his wife's funeral for aggressive behavior, he had no idea that Tank's entire platoon was inside the church. 7 minutes later, 30 Marines in dress blues emerged to find their brother convulsing on the pavement. "Officer, I'm going to ask you one more time to step away from my wife's grave." "Tank." Rodriguez said, his voice steady, despite the rage building in his chest as he watched Officer Bradley hover near Maria's fresh headstone. The young cop smirked, hand resting on his taser, clearly enjoying the power he held over the grieving veteran. "Or what, soldier boy, you gonna cry about it like you did when they carried her out in a box?" Bradley taunted, his words cutting deeper than any shrapnel Tank had taken in Afghanistan. The retired Marine's fists clenched as he took a step forward, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Son, I've buried better men than you'll ever be, but I've never wanted to put someone in the ground as much as I do right now." Bradley's hand moved to his weapon, but Tank's eyes held the cold calculation of a man who had survived 3 tours of hell and wasn't about to be intimidated by a rookie cop with a badge and an attitude. "The difference between us, officer, is that I know what real honor looks like, and you're about to learn what happens when you disrespect it." Want to see what happens when 30 Marines arrive to back up their brother? Subscribe, now smash that like button and listen to the explosive story of brotherhood, justice, and the moment when dress blues took over the street. Don't miss this heart-pounding tale of honor and loyalty. The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of St. Michael's Catholic Church, where white lilies and American flags created a solemn tribute to Maria Elena Rodriguez, beloved wife, mother, and Gold Star family member. The small suburban church in Riverside, California, had become a gathering place for grief, honor, and remembrance. Cars lined both sides of Magnolia Street, their occupants dressed in black, moving with the heavy steps of those carrying sorrow. Inside the church, the soft murmur of prayers mixed with muffled sobs as friends and family paid their respects to a woman who had spent 22 years as a Marine wife, supporting her husband through 4 deployments and raising their 2 children while he served overseas. The pews were filled with an unusual mix of mourners, neighborhood families, hospital colleagues where Maria had worked as a nurse, and an entire section of Marines in their dress blue uniforms, their white gloves folded respectfully in their laps. Outside, Daniel "Tank" Rodriguez, 45, stood alone on the church steps, his massive frame barely contained in his ill-fitting black suit. The retired Marine sergeant's hands shook not from grief alone, but from the PTSD that had plagued him since his final deployment to Helmand Province. Tank's weathered face, marked by shrapnel scars from an IED blast, showed the strain of a man who had buried too many friends and was now burying the love of his life. Tank had earned his nickname not for his size, though at 6'4" and 250 pounds, he was imposing, but for his ability to absorb punishment and keep moving forward. He had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, earned a Purple Heart and Bronze Star, and had been the anchor of his unit, the man others looked to when everything went wrong. But Maria's sudden death from cancer had broken something inside him that all the enemy fire in the world couldn't touch. The couple had been married for 22 years, meeting when Tank was a young lance corporal and Maria was a nursing student. She had been his anchor, his reason for coming home, his bridge back to civilian life. Now, 3 days after her death, Tank felt like he was drowning in a world that no longer made sense. What Tank didn't know was that Officer Kevin Bradley, a rookie cop with 6 months on the force and a chip on his shoulder about military heroes, had been watching him from across the street. Bradley had received a vague complaint about a suspicious person loitering near the church and had decided that the grieving veteran looked like trouble waiting to happen. Tank stepped outside during the service because the walls felt like they were closing in. The combination of grief medication and too many people in a confined space had triggered his anxiety. He needed airspace and a moment to compose himself before the eulogy he was supposed to deliver, words he had written and rewritten a dozen times, but still couldn't get right. He sat on the church steps, head in his hands, trying to remember Maria's voice telling him to breathe, to count to 10 to find his center. The techniques that had helped him through panic attacks were failing him when he needed them most. "Sir, I need you to move along," came a voice from behind him. Tank looked up to see Officer Bradley approaching, hand resting on his taser, body language aggressive and confrontational. The young officer's uniform was crisp, his attitude cocky, and his understanding of the situation non-existent. "I'm sorry, officer, but this is my wife's funeral," Tank replied quietly, gesturing toward the church. "I just needed some air." Bradley's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. "I don't care what you think is going on. I've had complaints about suspicious activity, and you fit the description. I need to see some ID." Tank's jaw tightened. He had dealt with power-hungry cops before, usually young ones trying to prove something. But today, at his wife's funeral, his patience was already stretched to the breaking point. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I'm not causing any trouble. I'm a retired Marine attending my wife's funeral service. My ID is in my jacket pocket." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Bradley snapped, his voice rising. "Don't reach for anything." Inside the church, the service continued, but several Marines near the windows had noticed the commotion outside. Staff Sergeant Mike Bulldog Chen, Tank's former squad leader, quietly slipped out the side door to assess the situation. Tank slowly reached into his jacket for his wallet, moving deliberately to avoid any misunderstanding. But Bradley, pumped up on adrenaline and convinced he was dealing with a dangerous individual, interpreted the movement as threatening. "I said don't move," Bradley shouted, drawing his taser. "Officer, please." Tank said, his voice remaining calm despite his rising anger. "My wife is being buried today. I'm not your enemy." But Bradley was beyond reason. The rookie cop saw a large, scarred man who wasn't immediately complying with his orders and his training, what little he had kicked in, with disastrous results. "Get on the ground now." Tank's military bearing kicked in. He had taken orders from officers, NCOs, and commanders for 20 years, but he had never taken abuse from anyone. "Officer, I'm going to stand up slowly and go back into my wife's funeral. You can follow me inside and verify who I am with 30 Marines who will vouch for me." The mention of Marines seemed to trigger something in Bradley. "Oh, you're one of those military heroes, huh? Think you're above the law?" That's when Bulldog Chen rounded the corner and saw his former squad leader being threatened by a cop half his age and a quarter his experience. Bulldog Chen approached carefully, his dress blue uniform immediately identifying him as military. "Officer, is there a problem here?" Bradley spun around, taser still drawn. "Stay back. This is police business. This is Sergeant Rodriguez," Bulldog said calmly. "He's a decorated Marine veteran attending his wife's funeral. I can vouch for his identity." "I don't care if he's George Washington," Bradley snarled. "He was acting suspicious, and he's not complying with lawful orders." Tank looked at his old squad leader and shook his head slightly, a signal Bulldog recognized from their time in Afghanistan. "Don't escalate. Let me handle this." But the situation was already beyond de-escalation. Bradley's radio crackled with backup requests. He had called in Painting Tank as a potentially dangerous individual who was resisting arrest and threatening officer safety. Inside the church, the disturbance was becoming impossible to ignore. Father Martinez, who had been delivering the homily, paused as the shouting outside grew louder. The Marines in attendance began exchanging glances, their protective instincts activated by the sound of their brother in distress. Gunnery Sergeant Lisa, Iron Washington Tank's former platoon sergeant, quietly stood up and moved toward the door. Behind her, 28 other Marines began filing out of their pews, their movement silent but purposeful. Maria's sister Carmen, who was sitting in the front row with Tank's 2 teenage children, looked confused and frightened. "What's happening?" she whispered to her nephew Tank's 17-year-old son, Miguel. Miguel, who had inherited his father's protective instincts, was already standing. "Someone's messing with Dad." Outside, the confrontation reached a critical point when Tank, frustrated by Bradley's refusal to listen to reason, took a step forward to show his military ID. "I told you not to move!" Bradley screamed. The taser fired. 50,000 volts of electricity slammed into Tank's chest, dropping the 250-pound Marine like a felled tree. His body convulsed on the concrete steps of the church where his wife's casket sat just yards away. Bulldog Chen's training kicked in immediately. "Officer down! Officer down!" he shouted, not referring to Bradley, but using the code that would bring every Marine within earshot running. The church doors burst open. What emerged from St. Michael's Catholic Church was not a mob, but a precision military unit. 30 Marines in dress blues, moving with the coordinated efficiency of soldiers who had trained together, fought together, and bled together. Gunnery Sergeant Washington took point, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded Marines in combat. "What the hell is going on here?" Bradley, suddenly faced with 30 angry Marines, realized he might have made a mistake. But his pride and training wouldn't let him back down. "This man was resisting arrest. I used appropriate force." Tank was still convulsing on the ground, the taser barbs embedded in his chest, his dress uniform torn and dirty. The sight of their former sergeant, a man who had saved lives, led missions, and earned their respect through blood and sacrifice, being brutalized outside his wife's funeral, triggered something primal in the Marines. "You tased a Gold Star husband at his wife's funeral," Iron Washington said, her voice deadly quiet. "You better have a damn good reason." Bradley's backup arrived 3 patrol cars with 6 officers who suddenly found themselves facing a situation they had never trained for. 30 disciplined, angry Marines who believed one of their own had been wronged. The standoff on Magnolia Street became a powder keg. On one side, 7 police officers led by a rookie who had made a catastrophic error in judgment. On the other, 30 Marines who had just watched their brother and war hero get tased outside his wife's funeral. Tank was slowly regaining consciousness, but the taser had triggered a severe panic attack. His PTSD, already strained by grief, exploded into full-blown flashback. In his mind, he was back in Helmand Province under fire, watching his Marines die. "Incoming, incoming!" Tank screamed, trying to crawl toward cover that didn't exist. Miguel Rodriguez pushed through the crowd of Marines to reach his father. Dad, it's Miguel. You're safe. You're at Mom's funeral." The sight of the decorated veteran having a breakdown on church steps while his teenage son tried to comfort him was more than the Marines could bear. Sergeant Major James "Top" Sullivan, the highest-ranking Marine present, stepped forward. At 55, he was a legend in the Corps, a man who had served in Desert Storm Iraq and Afghanistan. His presence commanded instant respect from both Marines and civilians. Officer Top said to Bradley, his voice carrying 3 decades of military authority, "You have 30 seconds to explain why you tased a Purple Heart recipient at his wife's funeral." Bradley, now realizing the magnitude of his mistake, tried to justify his actions. He was acting suspicious. He wouldn't comply with orders. "Suspicious?" Iron Washington interjected. "He was grieving outside his wife's funeral." The backup officers were beginning to understand the situation. Sergeant Davis, a 15-year veteran, approached Bradley. "Kevin, what exactly happened here?" "I got a call about suspicious activity. This guy was loitering, acting aggressively, loitering." Bulldog Chen exploded. "He was sitting on the steps of the church where his wife's body is lying in state." That's when Father Martinez emerged from the church, still wearing his ceremonial robes. The elderly priest had served as a military chaplain before taking over St. Michael's, and he understood both the law and military culture. "Officers," Father Martinez said calmly, "I can confirm that Sergeant Rodriguez is here for his wife's funeral. Maria Elena Rodriguez, a Gold Star wife who died of cancer 3 days ago. This man has sacrificed everything for his country, and today he buried the woman he loved. Whatever happened here, it was a misunderstanding." The priest's words cut through the tension like a knife. Even Bradley began to realize the enormity of what he had done. Tank was slowly coming back to reality, his son's voice anchoring him to the present. "Miguel, where's your mother?" "She's inside, Dad. We're at the funeral, remember?" The broken voice of a father asking for his dead wife shattered whatever justification Bradley thought he had. Around them, the Marines stood in formation, not threatening, but protective, creating a barrier between their wounded brother and the officers who had hurt him. Sergeant Davis made a command decision. "Bradley, you're done here. Get in your car and wait for internal affairs." "But Sarge," now, as Bradley retreated to his patrol car, the remaining officers found themselves in an unprecedented situation. They had a veteran having a PTSD episode, 30 angry Marines, a dead woman's funeral interrupted, and a rookie cop who had just created a public relations nightmare. Sergeant Davis, recognizing the need for de-escalation, approached Top Sullivan. "Sergeant Major, I apologize for what happened here. This was completely unacceptable." Top nodded grimly. "Sergeant, that man on the ground earned a Purple Heart saving Marines in Afghanistan. He's buried more friends than most people have. Today, he's burying his wife. Your officer tased him for grieving. I understand. We're going to make this right." But making it right wouldn't be simple. Tank was still struggling with his flashback, alternating between present awareness and combat memories. The Marines were furious, but disciplined, waiting for orders from their senior NCO. The funeral was disrupted. Maria's family was traumatized, and the entire incident was being recorded by dozens of cell phones. Father Martinez knelt beside Tank, speaking in the gentle voice he had used to comfort dying soldiers in Iraq. "Daniel, you're safe. Maria is waiting for you inside. Your Marines are here. You're home." Slowly, Tank's breathing steadied. The priest's words combined with his son's presence and the familiar sight of his Marines in formation brought him back to the present. Tank struggled to his feet, supported by Miguel and Bulldog Chen. His dress uniform was torn, his chest bore the marks from the taser barbs, but his dignity remained intact. "I need to deliver my wife's eulogy," Tank said quietly. "Dad, maybe we should—" Miguel began. "No." Tank's voice was stronger now. "Your mother deserves to be honored properly. She waited 22 years for me to come home from wars. She's not waiting anymore." Top Sullivan stepped forward. "Marines dress formation. We're escorting Sergeant Rodriguez back to his wife's service." But as the Marines formed up to escort Tank back into the church, more police units arrived. Someone had called in reports of a riot and armed confrontation, bringing additional officers who didn't understand the situation. Lieutenant Morrison, the watch commander, arrived to find 30 Marines in formation, facing 7 police officers with a tased veteran in the middle and cell phone cameras recording everything. "What the hell is going on here?" Morrison demanded. Sergeant Davis quickly briefed his superior, watching Morrison's face grow darker with each detail. "Officer Bradley tased a Purple Heart recipient at his wife's funeral." Morrison repeated, his voice incredulous. "Yes, sir." Morrison looked at the assembled Marines, then at Tank, who was standing with quiet dignity despite his ordeal. The lieutenant was a 20-year veteran who understood both police work and military culture. "Sergeant Major," Morrison addressed Top Sullivan, "on behalf of the Riverside Police Department, I apologize for this incident. Officer Bradley will face disciplinary action." Top nodded. "Lieutenant, we appreciate that, but right now we need to get this Marine back to his wife's funeral." What happened next became legend in both military and law enforcement circles. Lieutenant Morrison made a decision that transcended protocol and touched the heart of what it means to serve. "All units form an honor escort," Morrison ordered his officers. The police officers, understanding the gravity of the moment, lined up alongside the Marines. Together, cops and Marines united in respect for a fallen hero's widow and her grieving husband. They escorted Tank back into St. Michael's Catholic Church. The congregation, which had been watching the drama unfold through the windows, rose as one when Tank entered. His uniform was torn, his face showed the strain of his ordeal, but he walked with the bearing of a Marine. Father Martinez resumed the service, and Tank delivered his eulogy, a heartbreaking tribute to a woman who had loved a warrior and helped him find peace. Officer Bradley was terminated within 48 hours. The incident, captured on multiple cell phones, went viral with the hashtag #JusticeForTank. The video of 30 Marines in dress blues protecting their grieving brother became a symbol of military brotherhood and the need for police reform. Tank completed his wife's funeral with dignity, surrounded by his Marines and supported by a community that had witnessed both the worst and best of human nature in a single morning. The Riverside Police Department implemented new training protocols on military cultural awareness and de-escalation techniques, using Tank's case as a teaching moment for future officers. Lieutenant Morrison was promoted to captain and became a national advocate for veteran police relations. He worked with Top Sullivan to create a program that paired police departments with local veteran organizations. Tank, with the support of his Marines and his community, began speaking at police academies about PTSD military culture and the importance of treating veterans with dignity and respect. The incident led to federal legislation requiring cultural sensitivity training for law enforcement officers, particularly regarding military veterans and their families. 6 months later, at the dedication of a memorial garden in Maria's honor, Tank stood before a crowd that included police officers, Marines, and community members. Officer Bradley was not present. He had left law enforcement entirely. But Lieutenant Morrison was there, along with Top Sullivan and the Marines who had stood by their brother in his darkest hour. Maria always said that the best of America happens when good people stand up for what's right. Tank said, "Today, I'm surrounded by those good people, Marines, who had my back, police officers who chose justice over pride, and a community that refused to let hate win. The best of America happens when good people stand up for what's right, whether they wear badges or dress blues. What matters is the courage to do what's right." This became the motto of the Tank Rodriguez Foundation, dedicated to improving veteran police relations and ensuring that no Gold Star family ever faces such treatment again.